In this video, we're going to talk about red blood cells. And red blood cells can be called RBCs, and they can also be called erythrocytes. All of those terms mean red blood cell. They look kind of odd. They have what we call biconcave discs, so you can see these nice round cells, but on both sides we have this depression. And they're obviously red because they carry this molecule called, this protein called hemoglobin. And they are quite unique. When you look at blood under the microscope, majority of what you're going to see are going to be red blood cells. Remember, we said there are other formed elements in the blood. There's white blood cells and platelets, but by far the number of red blood cells is going to outnumber the white cells and the platelets. This is a diagram of the protein we know as hemoglobin, the protein that makes red blood cells red. And you can see it's got four proteins together to make up this one hemoglobin molecule. And the other thing you notice is it's got four atoms of iron. So, you know, we've all been told our whole lives, make sure you eat enough iron. And it's because it makes, iron is essential for normal hemoglobin function. And without normal hemoglobin, our red blood cells won't function normally. The shape of those red blood cells is really important because it allows them to kind of roll over each other and easily squeeze through very small spaces, particularly capillaries. Remember, capillaries are our smallest microscopic blood vessels. And here in this diagram, or in this photo, they're showing you how red blood cells are going through a capillary in single file. So the capillaries get quite small. The main function of red blood cells is to carry oxygen. And so hemoglobin, it has a very high affinity for oxygen. It attracts oxygen molecules. And let's see, we already said it contained iron. Yeah, and so when the blood's running through the blood vessels of the lungs, it's picking up oxygen from the lungs, and then the blood travels to the other parts of the body and it drops oxygen off to our cells. In addition, hemoglobin can carry carbon dioxide, some of the waste product from our cells, and carry that back to the lungs so we can release it. Okay. To make red blood cells, we need some cells that we call stem cells. And so stem cells are immature cells that can become any number of different types of cells. And so I'm going to go back to that figure 6.1 in the previous section on a picture that we skipped over. And so here's a picture. It's showing you if there's this stuff called red bone marrow that's found inside of some of our bones, and that's where blood cells are made. You've probably heard of people getting bone marrow transplants when they have certain kinds of cancer that can allow them to make new red blood cells or new blood cells in general. So there's stem cells in our bone marrow, and it turns out the stem cells in the bone marrow are capable of becoming red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So the same stem cells are going to specialize. And so here we have showing you that these stem cells are important to making red blood cells in the bone marrow. When I said that red blood cells look kind of odd, they have that biconcave disc structure. In addition to that, they actually don't have a nucleus. They don't have like the organelles like mitochondria and Golgi and endoplasmic reticulum and things you might have heard of in that other cells have. And that's because hemoglobin is so important that these red cells have evolved to dump out all of their organelles just so they can fit more hemoglobin in there and carry more oxygen. So what happens is red blood cells can't replace themselves. They don't have the genetic material to make more red blood cells. They always have to be made from the bone marrow. So a single red blood cell can only live for about 120 days, about 4 months. And then they're just going to die. So that tells you that we've got to be making new red blood cells all the time. And it says right here about 2 million red blood cells are destroyed per second, and an equal number needs to be produced at the same time. So we're constantly making new red blood cells and losing old ones. And here it says that as our red blood cells age, some of our white blood cells will engulf them and get them out of our system. Okay. I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the disorders related to red blood cells, particularly anemia. And there's a couple different kinds of anemia. Now, we talked a little bit already about how oxygen is delivered to cells and this thing called cellular respiration occurs. And with cellular respiration, you need oxygen and food so that the cells can generate ATP. That's their energy. And so without the delivery of oxygen, we're not going to be able to metabolize our food. We're not going to be able to generate energy. And so we're going to be really tired. And so here it says when there's an insufficient number of red blood cells, or each red blood cell does not have enough hemoglobin, we have something called anemia. So, and the first thing you'll notice with anemia is you're going to feel tired. So let me say it again. The importance of oxygen to our cells is our cells use nutrients from our food and oxygen from the air delivered by our red blood cells. And cellular respiration, these chemical reactions happen inside of our cells, and that's where our cells generate ATP, energy. Without oxygen, we can't generate ATP. We can't get energy from our food, and therefore we feel really tired. So anybody with anemia is going to be very fatigued. So like it says here, a reduced number of red cells or a reduced amount of hemoglobin can cause fatigue. Now, how does this happen? Well, there's a couple different kinds of anemia, and one is called iron deficiency anemia, where you don't have enough iron in your diet. And when that happens, you can't make enough hemoglobin, and therefore your red blood cells can't carry enough oxygen. So you're going to be tired. You're going to have anemia. You might even have, like, your gums might be pale, your skin might be pale just from not having enough red in your blood because you don't have enough hemoglobin. There's another kind of anemia that's called pernicious anemia. Now, here it says there's this vitamin called vitamin B12 that's important for the production of red blood cells. So if you don't have enough B12 in your diet, you also don't have enough oxygen carrying capacity in your blood, and you're tired. But pernicious anemia is specifically due to the lack of B12, and it's most common in older people because it turns out when we eat foods that have B12, like leafy greens and meat, and lots of things have B12 in them. But when you eat those foods, there's a molecule that carries the B12 from your foods through your digestive tract into your bloodstream. If you don't have that protein to carry the B12 into your bloodstream from your digestive tract, even if you eat enough B12, you don't get it into your blood. And it turns out this thing called pernicious anemia is when you can't extract that B12 from your food and get it into your blood. And it's just really common in older people. It's maybe about 30% of older people end up getting pernicious anemia. And what do? They notice they're kind of tired. They might not be mentally as sharp. And so what do? They give them B12 shots. And that way it bypasses it having to get in through the digestive system. So pernicious anemia is most common in older people, and it's due to a lack of vitamin B12 in the diet. The last kind of anemia I wanted to mention was what we call sickle cell anemia or sickle cell disease. And that's a genetic condition where the hemoglobin is abnormally formed, and it, as a result, causes the cells to be abnormally formed. Now, you can imagine if you have these little curved cells, these sickle cells, trying to get through a tight capillary, they could kind of hook together and cause blood clots. And so these blood clots can be very painful. They can cause all sorts of medical complications. And sickle cell anemia or sickle cell disease can be a life-threatening disease. So that's it on red blood cells. And I think you should be able to answer probably 1 and 2 on that. So good luck.